Let me tell you about two guys I'll call Marcus and Dan. Both opened their first 401k account on the same day in 2019, at the same HR orientation for the same mid-sized logistics company. The HR lady handed them both the same one-page fund selection sheet. Marcus picked the S&P 500 index fund because his dad told him index funds were safe and boring, and that safe and boring wins. Dan picked the same fund for the exact.
Let's start with the basics because you need the foundation before the math hits. The S&P 500 is a list of 500 large American companies. It gets updated periodically, companies get added when they grow big enough, companies get removed when they shrink or collapse. The index is weighted by market cap, which means bigger companies take up more of the index. A company worth $1 trillion takes up more space than a company worth $50 billion. That's by design. It's supposed to reflect the actual size of the American economy. In theory, that's elegant. In practice, it created a monster. Here's what happened. Between 2016 and today, 7 companies grew so fast, so relentlessly, that they now make up roughly 35% of the entire index. Just 7. NVIDIA, Microsoft, Apple, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta. Hold that number. 35%. We're coming back to it. Now, let's talk about how this actually happened, because the mechanism matters. Index funds work by automatically buying more of whatever is already big. The bigger a company gets, the more of it every index fund has to buy. The more index fund money flows in, the bigger those companies get, which means index funds have to buy even more of them. It's a self-reinforcing loop. It's not a conspiracy, it's just math. But the math has produced something that looks nothing like what people think they're buying. In 2025, those 7 companies were responsible for 42% of the total returns of the entire S&P 500. So even the gains aren't spread across 500 companies. The gains are 7 companies carrying. Let's talk about how expensive these 7 stocks actually are, because concentration only matters when something cracks, and something can only crack if it was stretched too thin to begin with. There's a measurement economists use to gauge how expensive the overall stock market is. You don't need the technical name. Here's what it tells you. On average, how many years of a company's earnings do you have to pay to own $1 of its stock? Historically, since 1880, that number averages around 17. Today, in mid-2026, it's sitting near 40. The only time in 145 years of American stock market history that this number has been higher was December 1999. Right before the dot-com bubble lost roughly 80% of its value over the next 2.5 years. In 1929, the year of the crash that triggered the Great Depression, this number was 32. That's like a single restaurant being worth more than the entire neighborhood it operates in. At some point, the math has to bend back. It always does. Now, here's why the market got this expensive. One word: AI. And here's the part where it gets actually insane, so stay with me. The entire bull case for this market rests on a single bet that artificial intelligence is going to deliver such massive productivity gains that it justifies paying record prices for everything. Maybe it will. Honestly, maybe it will. But let's look at how much money is being spent betting that it does. In 2026, just 4 companies, Microsoft, Google, Meta, and Amazon, are planning to spend roughly $725 billion on AI infrastructure, data centers, NVIDIA chips, cooling systems, electricity, the whole apparatus. That's a 77% increase from last year, which itself was a record. $725 billion from 4 companies in 1 year. To put that in. But here's what nobody wants to talk about. The whole AI economy is starting to look like a snake eating its own tail. NVIDIA announced a $100 billion pledge to OpenAI. OpenAI then turned around and signed a $300 billion contract with Oracle for cloud computing. Oracle is now raising $45 billion to fund the infrastructure needed to execute that contract. AMD gave OpenAI $34 billion in stock warrants. NVIDIA is financing a company called CoreWave. What does CoreWave do? It rents out NVIDIA chips. It's not even subtle. These companies are essentially writing each other checks and counting them as revenue. OpenAI has committed to roughly $1.4 trillion in spending over the next 8 years. Their current annual revenue is about $13 billion. So that's like signing a 30-year lease on a $4 million mansion while making $36,000 a year. Okay, take a breath, because we haven't even gotten to the macro yet, and the macro is where it gets dark. Here's the thing about expensive stocks. They're only justifiable if everything else is going right. So let's check on everything else. Inflation came in at 3.8% year over year as of the most recent reading, highest level in almost 3 years. The Federal Reserve, which 6 months ago was expected to cut interest rates 3 or 4 times this year, has officially taken cuts off the table. At their last meeting, they voted to hold rates steady. And here's the part that doesn't make the headlines often enough. The vote was 8-4. The Fed publicly argued with itself for the first time since 1992. That is not a minor thing. That is the closest thing to institutional chaos the Federal Reserve ever displays in public. And right now, the bond market is pricing in roughly a 37% chance of an interest rate. Then there's the debt. The federal deficit is on pace for $1.9 trillion this year. The national debt is over $38 trillion. The interest payment alone on that debt is now over $1 trillion a year. We are paying more in interest on our own debt than we spend on the entire United States military. Ray Dalio, who runs the largest hedge fund on the planet, recently called this an actual debt death spiral. That's a direct quote. When the man with $150 billion under management uses the phrase debt death spiral, you don't have to agree with him, but maybe just write it down. And now we get to the part that should genuinely concern you, because none of what I've described so far is the warning shot. This next part is. Remember 2007? Right before the housing crash, there were these little tremors. A small subprime lender here, a weird hedge fund failure there. Nothing big enough to dominate the news for more than a day. But in retrospect, every single one of them was a warning shot fired into the dark. We have those right now, and nobody is paying attention. The CEO of the largest bank in the United States publicly compared the credit market to a cockroach infestation. That's not theatrical. That's a man whose entire job is to make the financial system feel calm, choosing not to. So if you're keeping score right now, stocks at